being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on our website after the meeting. Also, just a reminder that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, officers and the public for any comments made during the meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and deemed to be slanderous. So apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Campbell and Councillor Shirley. I'll move. Seconder, Councillor Crosbie, thank you. And on Zoom today, we have Councillor Winters, Councillor White and Councillor Nees. Welcome. No public forum today. There are no items that aren't on the agenda. The order of business, there's to be no change. And are there any declarations of conflicts of interest? There being none, we're moving on to the minutes.
Not sure what's happened to Lyle today.
Lyle is sitting at the back of our room.
Oh.
I think he has technology issues. Yeah, so he's here looking very, very suave. Okay, so I shall move that the minutes of the 9th of April are a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Scott. Matters arising from those minutes? There are none. Okay, moving now to the operating environment. Mr. Lamb, in your capable hands.
Good morning, councillors. Kia ora koutou. I always feel a slight bit of imposter syndrome presenting these reports, knowing that a number of you are far more connected than I am to some of the things which are happening in central government. This report's a bit short of this month because a number of things are still moving through select committees. But just noting that obviously the Resource Management Bill under item 2.1, that's where the change to Te Manawa sits, and the changes to some of the regulations, particularly the intensive winter grazing and the stock exclusions. Stock exclusions will be picked up in our freshwater rules, and the intensive winter grazings didn't really touch the Bay of Plenty too much. Just also noting it's not in the agenda report here, but there's work going on for the NES drinking water standards. There's issues around technical mapping and around what rules apply within those mapped areas. That's something which staff are involved in working groups on, and that has the potential to interact with our freshwater rules. So that's something which is current, but we're watching closely. Just the other couple of notes. One is the farm plans continue to wind their way through a number of discussions in central government. We're still watching carefully to see where they land. The regional council's interest and the regional sector's interest is around where they sit in terms of a rule entirely voluntary, or do they sit within rules, and how does that kind of relationship work? So we have a number of staff again watching that, and that particular thing is what they're looking for quite keenly. And a slight sort of almost a matter of interest as well is that under item 4.1, Te Whanapanu was about to sign the deed of settlement, and the Crown withdrew from that signing process. So I'm not quite sure where that's up to. That does have some impact on our future work stream operationally, and also our freshwater work. So we're keen to find out when that deed of settlement is back on the agenda. Happy to take any questions, but like I say, there's a number of people in the room who are connected to various aspects of this.
Stephen, so councillors, questions or comments on the report? Councillor Scott, then Councillor McMillan.
Thanks for this, and insofar that it covers the subjects, it was good. I'm just wondering if we are also keeping a watching brief, not only with what's happening in central government, but there's some developments in local government. Are there, sort of long-term plans are starting to become available? We don't know what's happening in the TCC side of things. Are we? That's also part of our operating environment. So just want to make sure that we're aware of these things and keeping.
Yes, yeah. But often it takes a while for us to work through them to understand the detail of them and how they interact. But quite often we've been part of what's in their LTP through submission process and through joint projects. So we're usually familiar with the things that are of most interest to us.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Can you just remind me in terms of our submission to the RMA, freshwater and other matters. Because there was a draft. Was that the Te Uru Kahika one, or was that R1 or R1 based on that one? And when can we contribute to that, and what's the deadline there?
Yep, so I can answer that one. So as you'll be aware, through our regular updates, Te Uru Kahika has developed, I think, 4 submissions over the last 2 weeks on different parts of central government legislation. One of those is the RM bill, the other one was the climate change adaptation one, the coastal permits for marine farms, and the water services bill. In terms of the RMA Bill 1, which is the one you would, Councillor McMillan mentioned, so we circulated that draft on Friday. It is quite a quick turnaround. We did seek feedback by today at lunchtime
what
to
I'm
feed in.
thinking.
So there were a number of key components to that, which are highlighted on page 17 of your agendas. In terms of Te Mana o Te Wai, the regional sector were supportive of Te Mana o Te Wai, and there was mixed feedback across the councils. Most councils strongly oppose excluding the hierarchy of observations. Some of them remain neutral. In terms of the low slopes, the majority support the removal of the low slope maps. A small number of councils opposed the removal. In terms of intensive winter grazing, there was overarching support for the removal of the specific intensive winter grazing regulations. And in terms of amendments to speed up a process to prepare and amend national direction, certainly there was support for a more integrated, streamlined process and really early engagement with councils to do that. So those are sort of the highlights of the submission that we were seeking feedback to feed back into Te Uru Kahika on.
Yeah, because there's some, like the intensive winter grazing. Me personally, even from animal welfare grounds alone, I'm completely opposed to that being removed. But I understand that in the Bay of Plenty, we don't have resource consents for intensive winter grazing. So I don't know where I maybe offline I can have a discussion about that, but I don't know how much weight that will have. And the same with the slopes. So I'm really uncomfortable with some of those things being removed. I understand that, there's talk about unintended consequences and on farm management plans being able to better determine what makes, something suitable, et cetera, and there are complications with carte blanche rules. But personally, that's where I stand on those things. So anyway, and I just had another couple of comments, just sort of exasperated about the SNA's provisions, 31st of December 2030. We might have no biodiversity left by then, but and then do we know why the Te Whanau Apanui, why the Crown have stalled on that? No, we don't know why. Okay, and just the last point, with the climate change adaptation, so provided some key points to be considered as part of the wider sector submissions from Te Uru Kahika and the Aotearoa's Climate Adaptation Network. What, in a nutshell, are you able to just let us know what those are, those key points, or I know I've probably read them somewhere else. I've just
Certainly. So through the chair, in terms of the Te Uru Kahika climate change adaptation submission on the framework, there were key points in relation to seeking co-investment in climate resilient infrastructure, seeking the protection of liability, looking at role clarity and alignment of tools, seeking legislative consistency, and ensuring partnering with Māori and iwi, as well as making sure there's a strong data research component to support the prioritisation framework. So we circulated that submission as part of a previous councillor weekly email, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, but we can get that recirculated. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
So on Zoom, I have questions from firstly Councillor Nees, then Councillor White, and then Councillor Von Dadelsson.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that at the Smart Growth meeting the other day, when we were talking about how much land needed to be zoned for the period ahead, and the signal change from central government, well, from the National Party in their run up to the election, that they'll be requiring an immediate zoning of up to 30 years residential capacity. When I asked about that at the meeting, I think it was DIA reported that a paper had gone to Cabinet on that, and for us not to do anything more about planning for that until after Cabinet had made its decision. And I just wondered if anybody had heard any more about what the direction's going to be with regard to how much land you have to have available for Tier 1 councils and Hasu. Thank you.
Through the chair, I haven't heard anything and nothing has come through to Urukahika that I'm aware of in relation to that matter, but certainly I'll follow up again. Yep.
Councillor White.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a follow-up on the Whanawapanui situation. I know Stephen can't elaborate any further, but we've had some pretty strong characters over there, and no doubt the council visited them more recently and came back with a rather joyous response to the visit. I just wonder whether Councillor Eatey or anybody can enlighten us on the ground about what that is, because that spells sort of tension in that space, and therefore maybe some disruption to the relationships that we have with Whanawapanui at the moment. Any comment?
Kia ora. Yeah, as far as I've heard, the majority of the body of work in terms of the settlement was conducted by the last government and negotiated by the last government, and the current treaty settlement minister, Paul Goldsmith, did not feel comfortable to move ahead with it without him having his head around the entirety of the settlement, and so has pushed it back. I believe hotels and airlines, airplane tickets had already been booked by Te Whanawapanui, so they are not happy campers, say the least.
Councillor Von Dalton.
Yeah, just Councillor McMillan raised an issue as a personal issue. I just want to be clear, we are in a public forum, that she's talking as an individual, and that please staff don't take one, because we don't want all of us giving an individual opinion too much, because it just gets disruptive. So I'm just asking that staff don't take one person's opinion as necessary mean a consensus. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's perfectly legitimate for people sitting around the table to give their personal opinions, perfectly legitimate. We have a process in terms of our submissions, and that's the process that we're going to be following, I presume, Muta?
Absolutely. I would just note again, with these truncated timeframes, due to the limited amount of time we have to comment, our process has been a shorter one than what would normally be, but certainly we've pre-circulated the submission, open to hear feedback, and we look forward to receiving that feedback.
2 hours to go. Okay, I'm just looking at approximately 20 national direction instruments to be amended in the next 18 months. This is extraordinary. This is absolutely extraordinary. And I really do wonder if central government understands how local government works or can't work in this kind of environment. Personal opinion. So without further ado, I'm going to move receipt of this report, seconded by Councillor McDonald. Thank you. All those in favour, aye, against and carried. So Councillor Nees, we're going to move now to the report on the national planning standards. Are you? Yes, okay. So Councillor Nees and I were part of the current RPS hearings panel, which led to our current RPS. with a great deal of help from very competent staff. Mr. Rolleston Steed is here today. And actually, I have to say, personal opinion, I'm very proud of our current RPS and the way that it is structured, and that I believe it is exemplar in terms of being relatively easy for our customers and others to use. However, the previous government said that all planning documents, planning instruments should align with the national planning standards, and hence staff have done a great deal of work to now transfer our current RPS into the National Planning Standard Framework, which has led to an increase of 200 pages. And in my and Councillor Nees's view, makes it less user-friendly than our current document. And look, I'm just very conscious, Councillor Nees, don't want to put you on the spot, but you have some considerable concerns, and I think was seeking an opportunity for you and I to be able to have a discussion with staff to actually see whether some of those concerns could be assuaged and just keep it as relatively user-friendly. So, Councillor Nees, sorry to put you on the spot, but would you be good enough to outline some of your concerns in terms of the new document? No criticism of staff whatsoever. This is a national direction, and I think you've done an extraordinary job in terms of trying to put it into this new format, but goodness gracious me. So, Councillor Nees.
Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, I want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that's gone into this. I see that staff have worked really hard to try and fit our RPS, which I believe was based on the Wellington regional model, into this new planning framework. And I guess I did not, when we agreed with the structure, proposed structure, I didn't understand what that would look like in the new RPS when it was massaged into the new planning framework. So I guess some of my concerns are that we have a structure whereby we have policies, and then we have methods, and then we have the explanation to the policies. In some of the different sections or subject areas, we've integrated not just those policies that relate to that chapter in our existing RPS, but we've added in other policies from different parts of the document. So some areas have actually got a lot bigger. And I'll just give you an example of the Kaituna area, where if you look at the section around the Kaituna on page 356, we've got 24 policies that pertain to the Kaituna. But when you have a look on page 422 in the appendices, which identifies the directive policies, the ones that really are the ones that pertain to the Kaituna catchment, there's only 10. So we have that sort of thing in the sections around integrated management. We don't just have the policies that we had in the integrated management chapter, but we also have a whole lot of Takawhenua policies. We also have a lot of water policies. And so I just like an opportunity to talk to staff to understand exactly what we can and can't do within the existing or the new planning framework, whether or not we'll get shot if we obey the letter of the law, or whether there is some halfway house that we can come to, which makes it easier for the reader who may not be familiar with our regional policy statement at all, to navigate their way around it. And I do understand that it hasn't been formatted, and once it's got the formatting, it might be much easier. But I'm just sort of wondering if there's some things that we can do to make it more user-friendly. And one good example is, you know, in the methods, we have a list of all of the methods that relate to a particular policy or particular area of the plan. And when you reference, I think it's the resource consent method, underneath it, there's a list of all of the policies that that method relates to. And I'm sort of asking myself, does that have to be in every part of the plan, or can you just say refer page X, and then you can go and have a look at all of the other policies that that method actually relates to? So there's a whole lot of things that I think, is this really what we have to do? And is this really as user-friendly as we can make it? And there's also a couple of little errors that I've picked up, policy numbers, that sort of thing. And a bit of overlap, for example, between the coastal marine area and the coastal environment sections. So I'm just not comfortable signing it off as it is right now. I'd like to have a bit of a chat to the staff first to understand what we absolutely have to deliver on. And is there any way we can make this document a little bit more user-friendly? Thank you.
So the question is, as per Councillor Nees, can there be an opportunity for Councillor Nees, myself and anybody else who's interested to work through with staff issues and to see whether, in fact, there are ways that this could be improved from a customer perspective, etc. So conscious, that's the question that I'd like to know.
Through you, Madam Chair, the answer is yes. Yeah, we're happy to work with you. Took us a while to let go of the operative RPS in terms of liking the structure and the format, and then having to remove that and start fresh with the new standards. The intervention logic for the national planning standards is that you have a lot of national organisations that deal across regions, across districts, and so the idea is that if you have a nationally consistent structure and a format for all district plans, regional plans, and regional policy statements, it would make it easier for people that go from district to district, region to region, knowing where in the plans they need to find it, not having to, if you used plans, you know how challenging it can be to figure out and understand the nuances of different plans. So I guess I can understand from that perspective, but yeah, when you look at we've tried to, most of it's black and white. So most of what we've done, we believe is interpreted it as it is intended to be interpreted. And so there are areas of grey with everything, and we can work around those. And we could potentially choose in certain areas that we may decide not to implement them, but that goes against the whole intent of the national planning standards. So we need to be wary of that and careful. Yes, we did model it off the Wellington Regional Policy Statement template, and Wellington and other councils, regional councils, have at this point in time decided not to go ahead with complying because they don't like the standards either. But this council made the call back in May 2021 to go ahead with this on the basis that we would release it as national planning standards compliant when we release the draft essential freshwater changes to the RPS, and that we would do the same. And then when we notify the changes, it would be in a compliant format and structure. So that was the reason why it lagged slightly behind the 13th of May deadline, which is the deadline for making this publicly available. But moving forward, and as with this document, as you're aware, it does involve duplication. However, we've been careful not to amend anything more than what would be considered consequential. Otherwise, we'd have to go through a Schedule 1 submissions process. So when you talk about provisions from one chapter having been repeated, those linkages from the Rangataiki River chapter, they should all be existing cross references. So they just they shouldn't be any new policies or provisions linked to any of those objectives. It's just the way the RPS works. You can utilize, because it's a integrated management document, so you can utilize different provisions from different topics that achieve the same, seek to achieve the same outcomes. I think I'll leave it at that, just to say that yes, we are happy to meet with you and try and find a better balance moving forward.
Thank you very much for that, councillors. Is there anyone opposed to us not adopting this today, but allowing an opportunity for those who are interested to have a discussion with staff about the potential for ensuring that this is as customer friendly and appropriate as is possible? Is there anyone opposed to that? There being nobody opposed, I think it's appropriate for us just simply to have a resolution that, Namuta?
Through the chair, given we are not meeting the statutory timeframes, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with the decision that you're making. Perhaps we note that a report will be brought back in September, which is your next Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, following the discussions, seeking your approval to move forward on that basis.
So I'll so move. Councillor Scott?
Just for information, so you mentioned that there are some other councils who have decided not to comply. And if this is about national consistency, what timelines are they talking about which might affect our timelines?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can't say exactly what their timeframes are. Just part of the rationale for not proceeding is that there's been a lot of changes forced upon regional councils, not just the national planning standards, and so other councils have prioritised other changes like freshwater plan changes, what have you. So I can't speak to the timeframes that other councils have put in place to implement the national planning standards. Sorry.
Perhaps through the chair as well, just to note in relation to that, the reason we sought this council's feedback back in 2021 on the structure and the timing is because that it links with the freshwater changes that we're developing at the same time. So the idea was to have the standards compliant RPS in place so that when we release the draft at the end of the year, that the draft would be in the relevant compliance standards as well. So it's a sequence of activities. So we just need to consider the implications on the other projects that we're drafting on the basis of having this in place as well. So
also through you, Madam Chair, sorry, I should have mentioned this, is that when we went to policy special interest group meeting in May, and MFE officials were present, and my understanding from that discussion is some of the councils were hoping that the national planning standards would be amended and there would be a pause and longer delay in terms of having to implement, but the feedback from the officials was that the national planning standards haven't figured in the new government's priorities, hasn't been mentioned as an area of focus, and so there was no my understanding from the conversation, there's no undertaking for any amendments to national planning standards.
Any further comments or questions? So I have moved that motion, which is about deferral, seconded by Councillor Von Dadels, and all those in favour, aye, against and carried. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you. And again, all of the work that's gone in, this has nothing to do with that, but this is just... Okay, so now we are moving on to the policy on dangerous earthquake-prone and flood-prone dams. I confess I found this an IQ test and I think I failed miserably, but welcome. Thank you for the report, and we will let you lead off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, I'd like to introduce Arslan Karim. He is a new planner and a little novel in the sense that half of his time he works for Regional Council, half of his time he works for Opotiki District Council, and he will be leading up the Hikataya Urban Growth Area Plan Change for Opotiki District Council. And prior to him starting, compliance enforcement got a hold of planning and said we need to implement these new dangerous earthquake prone, flood prone dam regulations that central government had put in place. And so before Arslan started, he was already identified as the lead to prepare this wonderful new policy and regulation that we have to implement. So I'd like to take this report as read. I have some of my highly esteemed colleagues from engineering and compliance who are experts in this area as well. So I will just pass it over if there's any questions. Sorry.
Perhaps Nessa.
Sorry,
I could just introduce, most of the councillors will know Kathy Theolarden, who's our environmental engineering team leader, and Reese Irving, who's our senior regulatory project officer as well.
We're in your hands. Oh, and Mark Townsend is on Zoom if required. Thank you. So who's kicking off? The report's taken as read. Do you want to add anything?
I did have some notes, but I don't think I printed them out. But basically, MFE and MPI, I think,
MBIE.
or MBIE, they've been working on these regulations for the last 2 years. We do have an existing dangerous dams policy 2006. So central government been dealing with most of the owners of these large dams. So they're usually the councils or our energy providers, infrastructure providers. However, there's a lot of private dams around the region. We have done a bit of work. There is a plan or a map available, but it needs to be ground truth. So we think potentially in the figure of around 70 dams in the region existing that could be deemed classifiable. But as I say, we have to ground truth that. In terms of the Building Act requirements to implement the dangerous dams or the existing regulations, that responsibility is delegated to Waikato Regional Council and will continue to be delegated to Waikato Regional Council moving forward under the new regulations. However, it places the onus on dam owners to commission an engineer, a recognised engineer that has to go through and classify the dams, and then if they're classifiable is either high or moderate, then they need to go through and prepare a certification and a monitoring program to ensure compliance of those dams and identify the risk and the areas downstream and the likely effects if the dams were to fail, either because of an earthquake, flooding, or just because they were badly constructed and they're overdue to fail, maybe, hopefully not. And so until recently, the definition of a dangerous dam included both a height of 4 meters and greater than or up to 20,000 cubic meters in volume of liquid stored behind the dam, or lower than 4 meters and greater than, I think it was 2 meters in height and greater than 40,000 cubic meters in volume of liquid. That changed late in the piece to only being dams 4 meters high and up to 20,000 cubic meters of volume of liquid stored behind it. And also the time frame was reduced from 18 months to 3 months, and that kind of put us in a sticky situation. So normally in these situations, council staff would do right by councillors by developing a draft and going through a process of ensuring you're happy with that before we release it for a stakeholder consultation. However, because of the time frame being reduced late in the piece, we've had to truncate the process, and that's why we've brought it to you with the very tight timeframes, and also seeking to appoint a hearing panel to consider the submissions. We've modelled this policy off Waikato Regional Council. So there's only a couple of councils, as far as I'm aware, in New Zealand to date that have actually gone through and developed the policy ahead of the rest of the bunch. So we're with most of the pack, is my understanding. And so based a lot of this policy off Waikato Regional Council's dangerous, earthquake prone and flood prone dam policy.
You did very well for no notes, Nessa. Well done. Councillor Winters.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, in the Rotary catchment, we've got a whole lot of detainment bunds. Understand the specifications of 20,000 cubes and 4 metres, but does this include detainment bunds? Because my understanding is when these detainment bunds were built, they were engineered till the cows come home. In fact, a lot of the farmers complained that half the capital cost was in the engineering and the peer reviewing of the engineering. So does it include detainment bunds?
Through you, Madam Chair, if the dam detainment bund exceeds 4 metres in height and holds 20,000 cubic metres volume, then yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure our farmers would be too chuffed with going back to them and saying, hold on, guys, your dam's bigger than specs. They'll probably just take the top off it and let it go.
Through the chair, perhaps as well to clarify, earlier this year, and here comes Ruben. It's my understanding that earlier this year, MBIE clarified the definition of a classifiable dam to remove the majority of the farming type bunds. But I'm sure Ruben will be able to add.
Here comes Ruben.
Thanks, Namita, and through you, Madam Chair. Mark Townsend will be able to comment on this as well, I'm sure. But Councillor Winters, you would have seen a number of the detainment dams that John Patterson has been a strong advocate of. Those detainment bunds will not be captured under this policy.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Yeah, kia ora. Just a question to our engineers, maybe whoever can answer. Obviously we have a lot of tectonic activity in our particular region across the country, actually, but in our particular region, just wondering if there's any learnings or aspects that came from the Ejikum earthquake, for example. It was a nasty one, and whether there was any learnings, or has this been policy being developed against those types of learnings, tectonic learnings, if you like? Just a question of interest from me.
So sorry, Mark, I didn't see you behind the water jug, and you wanted to respond to the last question, and you might like to respond also to the tectonic question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so just to address Councillor Winters' question, the detention dams are limited to 10,000 cumecs and 1.5 metres high, or 5,000 cumecs and 2.5 metres high. So don't fit under this particular dangerous dams policy. Around the tectonics, Councillor White's question, always as we look at new policies, new standards, etc., obviously reflect on what's happened in the past. And of course, the 1987 earthquake was a big earthquake in the past, and I think guidance and standards reflect that as we sort of move forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I actually am happy about the policy. I'm quite happy to sign it off. But one question I'd like to understand is, I know that we've got maps and we need to do ground truthing, but are staff aware of any that might be in the dangerous category that are near major centres of population? I think we need to have a bit of a heads up if there are any where large numbers of people might be at risk. Of course, every life is valuable, but I just like to get some idea of the scale of the impact of these dams.
Would you like to answer that one? Reece?
Through you, Madam Chair. We have not categorically looked at every dam that we know about. At the moment, there are none that are classified an imminent threat of collapse upstream of a population base. But certainly as we go through the implementation of the new regulations, that's when these classifiable dams are going to be relooked at by engineers. We do know of some rural dams, at least 3 that have come to our attention recently, which will be classifiable. They were built by farmers without engineering specs in the 70s and 80s. They do meet the height and volume limits, but we kind of look at those. We've engaged with the rural landowners that they are on. If there was an imminent collapse downstream, it's likely to be flooding across the farmers' paddocks and into gullies without a population base downstream. And we are working with those landowners to see in the short term what measures can be taken. One of those dams has been emptied as a result of our site visit. But the other ones we expect obviously will be evaluated through the engineering process going forward.
Thank you, Rhys. Any further questions or comments? We just need now volunteers. I think Councillor McMillan has volunteered to be on the hearings panel. Councillor Crosby? Yeah, I noticed in the report it said the requirement was for these RMA, but
Correct, through you, Madam Chair. We did put that down. I think we see that as best practice, but you know, if you choose to waive that requirement, that's fine.
Happy to give you 19 years of hearing experience if you want it.
Can I just say though, just to add that for Waikato, they had 5 submissions. Not saying that that's how many we would receive. I'm just saying they had 5 submissions and the hearings and deliberations were over within half a day.
Councillor Nees?
I'm happy to be on the panel if you need me. Yes.
Well, Councillor Nees is a certified chair, so that looks pretty good. Councillor Scott, are you? There you go. We've got a panel of 4. Brilliant. Anybody else wants to be on it? The survivors of the navigation bylaw? No, you. Okay, so there we have our 4 panelists. So I'm going to move recommendations 1 through 7 with the addition of those names. Do I have a seconder?
Just a question. Thanks, Chair. Rhys, a similar question to Councillor Nees. The one that springs to my mind is the dam that sits above the camping ground at Waihi Beach, which used to be the old water storage. I mean, that'd get caught in this. That must be on your agenda.
Yes, it's one of the 80 dams that we have looked at, that we have identified, where we will be contacting the dam owners directly as part of the submissions process, but we haven't made an assessment on any of these dams as to their integrity at this point in time.
So can I have a seconder for the motion, Councillor McDonald? Any further debate or discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, aye, against, carried. Thank you very much indeed for the report. So now we're going to move to the RPS change 6 and the terms of reference. NASA, take it as read.
Yes, please, Madam Chair. It's just a catch up. At the last time we reported this up, you jumped us and appointed a hearing committee. Thank you very much. So we had to bring these terms of reference for adoption following that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy with those. And Councillor Nees, you're on it. Are you happy with the terms of reference? Good. Anybody who's not? Great. Move the motion. Thank you, Councillor Thurston. Any further debate or discussion? There being none, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, aye, against, and carried. And we're now going to move to the final report, which is on the circular economy. And then we're going to be able to adjourn for morning tea before we start our rather heavy session on freshwater matters. So who is going to present the report on the circular economy?
I think, Madam Chair, that I may be arm twisted into this.
Oh, excellent, Rhys. Right, the floor is yours.
So we have been involved in a joint project with the Tauranga City and Western Bay of Plenty district councils. And part of their waste strategies were to look at how we develop and progress circular economy thinking in 3 key sectors of the Bay of Plenty. So we looked at the construction and demolition industries, we looked at healthcare and rest homes, and we looked at food and beverage production. And basically, here's the man who I wanted to be leading this rather than myself.
Apologies for lateness, Madam Chair and councillors. Good morning.
Actually, I don't think we're late. I think the committee's going quite ahead of time, which is great. But so we looked at these 3 different sectors in our economy to determine how can we best work with these industrial sectors to move their thinking and their business practices towards less that produce, use, discard, landfill, whatever, to moving their products back into a system whereby they could be reused and hopefully go through an eternal system of use. And we're specifically having commissioned a report that has come out with several recommendations. We are now working through those recommendations to ensure that we've got some things that are concrete and being implemented. And we are starting that with the construction and demolition sector in particular, which is where we think we can make some pretty rapid gains.
Thanks, Rhys. Dean, welcome. Would you like to make some opening comments, acknowledging all of the work that's in front of us?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors. Just I think added to Rhys's notes. So obviously this report was finished a couple of months ago, but it's our first opportunity to present it to councillors. It didn't fall nicely within the meeting schedule. Since the report's been released, we've just been working on a few other things. So we've talked to Zespri and some post-harvest facilities around kiwifruit, non-export kiwifruit waste, and what happens in those spaces. So they've sent through a list of what they call licensed processors who turn those fruits into juices and other products. Some of it goes to animal feed and others is just shared around community groups and the like. We've had a chat to an organisation called Repost, who take old orchard and vineyard timber posts and repurpose those for fencing. So that's a conversation we had the other day. Tauranga City Council are moving forward on some efforts with retirement villages and division of food waste. And also with one of the other recommendations in the report, particularly in construction and healthcare sectors, there's an opportunity there to have they call the sub-regional waste project officer. So TCC are looking at whether they can repurpose an existing role to take on that position. So that role to lead and facilitate a lot of this work would allow Rhys and I to sort of plug in and support wherever we can. So I think with that, I'm happy to take any questions and comments from councillors.
Thank you. So Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. How did you? I thought you were being telepathic there because I didn't think I'd put my hand up before you. You just knew. Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear about the kiwi fruit because I know this year we had a major surplus of waste kiwi fruit, so that's really exciting to hear. I just noticed in the report talks about opportunities in the health and food and beverage sectors will be progressed in due course. So that sounds a bit ambiguous to me. Am I picking from your intro that it's kind of piece by piece, very industry specific, that you're kind of plucking off the lower hanging fruit as and when, or is there a time frame? I know, for example, with the DHB, there used to be somebody employed in sustainability. There probably still is, but it's not the same person in terms of taking waste out of the health sector. And yeah, it just sort of feels quite loose. The construction, that's great, that's underway. Are we able to get tighter time frames? Because this is all well, it's all low hanging fruit in the sense that it's all there and it's all going to landfill all of the time, and it's big stuff.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so as Reza mentioned with construction, that's obviously there's an industry group already set up, so hence moving through there. The project team with ourselves and Tauranga City and Western Bay staff, we've met on what some of the actions are and where we can progress. So a part of that is actually working with those staff on what each council's capacity is and where they can fit in. So I think we'll start to have more of a firm plan around that, and particularly as LTPs are adopted and the like, we can actually sort of make it firmer plans around there. So hence the ambiguity, I guess, at this stage, but we are looking to make some more firmer timeframes on that in this.
Okay, cool. And just one more question, if I may. So with central government pulling away from their support of the circular economy, in the report it says, you know, regionally it will continue regardless. Will there be some financial implications, therefore making things a lot harder for us with central government's move away from this?
It's hard to tell because I'm not sure where that strategy was actually at in terms of the work. I think that was due to be finished in 2025. Is it maybe? So I think in terms of just our immediate actions in the region, working as closely as we can with different industry groups to progress the things that they support where we can is probably the best way to do that. As to whether there was going to be any central government funding for circular activities, I'm not sure. That may have been a recommendation out of that strategy. But at the moment, I think it's a fairly tight environment, as we all know. So just working within our current constraints.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Nees, then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you. It's sobering to note that some of the major initiatives that could potentially be low-hanging fruit are relying on national initiatives or schemes. But the one thing that fascinated me in the executive summary when I was reading the section on the health sector, it said dentistry is a more fragmented part of the sector and may be more difficult to influence widely. And I was thinking, is this old plate that people are not using anymore? Is it the amalgam fillings that are no longer needed? It just seemed quite odd. Or is it the raw materials that's used by dentistry? Could you give me a little bit of information as to why dentistry was actually singled out like that?
I think that one was because the dentistry practices are owned by, I guess, the dentists themselves rather than a collective, say, Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand unit. And I think through our engagement through that, there wasn't already an existing sort of meeting of dentists. I think that came together. So having to implement actions would have to almost be on a practice by practice basis, as opposed to being able to talk to a sort of centralised agency like a Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand. So I think that's where the crux of that came from. So, and the waste is very varied, the streams of waste through there. So.
And sorry, might just add to Dean's, we found something quite similar in the aged care industry. A lot of, there's a lot of different operators within aged care. So there was no comprehensive body covering all of the rest homes and all of the aged care homes. So trying to make an impact there means going individually to each site and speaking with each site's management to determine whether they'd be interested in getting on board. So was a little bit different than dealing directly with contacts at Te Whatu Ora. Yeah.
No question, Madam Chair, but I thought there was an interesting piece in there for you and I on how best to discard our wine bottles.
Exciting. So we're going to move receipt of the report. Councillor McMillan has moved. Seconded Councillor Crosbie. No further questions, debate or discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye, against and carried. And this is a record. A record. Not even 10:30 and we're finished. Thanks heaps to staff. Wonderful effort. We're now going to adjourn until 11:45 when we will reconvene for the freshwater workshop. Thank you, Namuta and Mirinda.